Aren't you get some sense in your silly heads? And get out of the rain. The man suddenly barked at the dripping hands. Don't be like me. What's the good of getting all soaked? No, don't be like me. Wading around in the swamp, in the rain, looking for the dog who couldn't possibly have brains to find his way back here. The hens poked about, did not even look up. The man shrugged his shoulders and hurried across the barnyard. He disappeared from the dog's side in the basement of the barn. A few moments later, the man had gone into the basement of the whole barn and suddenly shivered and shook as from under the hay-covered floor. There came the sound of a heavy, crashing blow. The dog stood rigid, but the white hen rose up from her nest, stalked through the deep hay. Again, a blow rocked the barn, shivered the hay. The chickens ran faster, her head twisting nervously, and then she bolted up to the high beam. Under the floor, after many blows, there was a thud as a huge field stone broke from the basement wall. The dog washed. The stone rolled into the barnyard as its full sent a dull, almost soundless underground shaking through the barn. The chicken on the beam ducked out of sight. The pounding of the heavy sledgehammer blows began again. But somehow the dog understood that it was the man breaking the big filled stones of the basement wall. At last the pounding ended and did not resume. Where was I? The dog stood alert, ears up. The sudden silence, the completeness of the silence made the chickens nervous. She uttered a short crackle, and then an egg came rolling over the edge of the beam. It thudded, it splattered. The dog leaped towards the broken egg. The egg divulged the sweet, smooth feel of the egg yolk still clinging to his tongue. The dog again remembered duty and padded to the wall to search out for the man and his doings. Chickens were streaming down the wet ramp. The rain had stopped. Then the dog heard the old car rattle away down the road. It was Sunday afternoon, milking time on the big farm. The dog waited for the last sounds of the car to disappear. Then he lunged at the loose board and made the plunge of the wagon. He leaped down from the wagon and started across the field. Suddenly, he seemed to remember something, turned and raced to the basement of the barn. A white egg lay under the hay loader, only partly covered with hay. The chicken was gone. Greedily, the dog poked his nose into the narrow spaces and blooded his nose into the sharp end of the stiff, dry hay stalk. It hurt. The dog swiped a hasty paw at his nose and remembered. Whole eggs were not for him. Whole eggs belonged to his boss, which is the little hen. His tail quivered. He was so pleased that he had remembered, carefully so as not to poke his nose into any more haystacks. He lifted the egg with his mouth and set out to take it to his little hen. The dog pushed his head under the leaning trunk of the willow. His tail wagged his friendliness as he pleased with himself that he had thought to bring her the egg. He poked his head towards the nest to deliver the egg. The little hen angrily lashed out at him. The dog pulled back in confusion, hastily opened his mouth, let the egg roll. The little hen saw the egg. Like a ball of puffed furry, she came out of the nest. She leaped at the dog, bit at him with the bony edge of her wings, drove him back from the egg. But the moment she had him away from the egg, she ignored him. Clanking greedily, fussing and nervous, she worked the egg into her nest. The dog looked at her in humble confusion. She was puzzled, but still in a way meekly grateful that the little hen had accepted his egg. But otherwise, the little hen had changed completely in the long, rainy day. She even looked different. All her feathers stuck out. She looked like a red-feathered puffball. The feather ball clacked and clacked and clacked and clacked, drearily, endlessly, and now she settled herself on 4 eggs. But the crackling went on. The dog did not know that this long, rainy day the little hen had become Brody. The position of the eggs had brought on the Brodiness and hurried it. The Brodiness would have come anyhow. It was spring, the time for being a mother. A strong instinct in the little hen and had changed her in one rainy day. She had become a tyrant. And she had become mean, short-tempered and irritable, patient and tender only with the eggs. But she had become a mean little tyrant, and she was not help herself. The eggs under her were tyrant. The eggs possessed her.